Phillip Larkin is a highly renowned poet hailing from Coventry, England, born on August 9th, 1922. He was educated at St. John's College and at Oxford University, where he graduated first-class honors in 1943.
Larkin is widely recognized for his abstract and daring style of writing, discussing many topics that other writers would not normally talk about. His works often stirred up controversy and debate as he explored many topics from many different point of views.
Larkin was a very modest man who was not in the public eye very often, despite his widespread fame. After college, he worked at a local library while living with his mother. Larkin also never married, although he had several different partners, even multiple at one time.
Larkin was unique in the sense that he did not conform to the common style of poetry in this time. He wrote about humankind and emotional struggles, social issues, and general English life.
Larkin was said to be influenced by poets such as William Butler Yeats and Thomas Hardy, although he has denied this. The influences of these poets were apparent in Larkin's earliest works, and he soon formed his own style of writing.
Larkin's writings classified him in a group known as the Movement, who used past writers and their traditional styles to base their own writing off of. Larkin began to write about the world around him and contemporary discomfort and insecurity.
Larkin ended his writing careers in the late 1970s with his 1974 volume of poems titled High Windows. Although his writing collection was small, it had an immense impact on other writers and his audience, with his new and perplexing views and feelings on life.
Philip Larkin died on December 2nd, 1985, having accrued great awards and recognition over his career. His awards include the Shakespeare Prize for Outstanding Writing Talent, the Order of Companion of Honor for his excellent literary skills, and the W.H. Smith Literary Award of the United Kingdom in 1984.
Of all of Larkin's works, here are three in which we feel epitomizes his style and writing personality. The very first poem we will analyze is Deceptions, written in 1950, addressing the drugging and raping of a young girl in Britain.
Deceptions is an extremely moving poem, primarily because it is based on true events. The girl depicted in the poem was drugged and raped by a man, and Larkin attempts to capture her agony and pain, and even a little bit of the perpetrator himself.
Even so distant, I can taste the grief, bitter and sharp with stalks. He made you gulp. The sun's occasional print, the brisk, brief worry of wheels along the street outside, where bridal London bows the other way, and light, unanswerable, and tall and wide, forbids the scar to heal, and drives shame out of hiding. All the unhurried day, your mind lay open like a drawer of knives. Slums, years, have buried you. I would not dare console you if I could. What can be said, except that suffering is exact, but where desire takes charge, readings will grow erratic. For you would hardly care that you were less deceived out on that bed than he was, stumbling up the breathless stair, to burst into fulfillment's desolate attic.
In the first stanza, Larkin is speaking of a man who had spiked a young woman's drink and proceeded to assault her. This is very emotional in itself, given this horrible crime committed. The second stanza begins with a powerful line, "I would not dare console you if I could." This line speaks for itself, showing the great trauma associated with sexual assault and the effect it can have, especially on such a young and innocent girl. It is clear that no words can heal this girl, which is difficult to swallow. Further in the poem is where Larkin received some criticism, as it seemed he was siding with the man when he wrote the lines, "For you would hardly care that you were less deceived out on that bed than he was stumbling up the breathless stair to burst into fulfillment's desolate attic." It seems that Larkin believes that the perpetrator of this awful crime is more vulnerable and sick here, because of his emotional state that propelled him to hurt that young woman. This is just one of many examples of how Larkin tries to get under the skin of his audience. Larkin uses many literary devices like similes and metaphors such as, "Your mind lay open like a drawer of knives," and Slum's years have buried you. These particular lines perfectly display the very emotions of such a dramatic atrocity like this. Feeling cornered and buried alive, with trauma stabbing you. Larkin also utilizes rhyme in this poem. The rhyme scheme of this poem is not exact, as there are particular lines that do not rhyme, perhaps to place emphasis on them. For example, the poem begins, "Even so distant, I can taste the grief, bitter and sharp with stalks he made you gulp. The sun's occasional print, the brisk brief, worry of wheels along the street outside." The second line does not rhyme, which brings attention to it, as it is a very important line. It describes how the young woman's drink was spiked, and how the man made her drink. The very next line continues a normal rhyme scheme. The same occurs later in the poem in the second stanza, and it is evident that this was done purposely to call attention to these lines, as they are vital lines when trying to understand what this woman is going through. Another poem of Larkin's that contains an odd rhyme scheme is Afternoons, written in 1959.
Afternoons is just another of Larkin's deep and meaningful poems about life.
Afternoons. Summer is fading. The leaves fall in ones and twos from trees bordering the new recreation ground. In the hollows of afternoons, young mothers assemble at swing and sand pit, setting free their children. Behind them, at intervals, stand husbands in skilled trades, an estate full of washing, and the albums lettered "Our Wedding" lying near the television. Before them, the wind is ruining their courting places, that are still courting places, but the lovers are all in school, and their children, so intent on finding more unripe acorns, expect to be taken home. Their beauty has thickened. Something is pushing them to the side of their own lives.
This poem is unique as it does not have any rhyme scheme, adding to its theme and message. This poem describes post-war life in Britain and the relation between childhood and adulthood. In this poem, Larkin analyzes how children live a very easy life in comparison to their parents, and do not have to worry about what their mothers and fathers do. They simply play through the day and come home to clean clothes and dinner. This freedom comes at the expense of their parents, however, saying how mothers and fathers must surrender all of their personal desires and happiness for their children, who will inevitably grow up and lead the same kind of bland and unfulfilling lives as their parents did, further continuing the cycle of life. It is evident in the lines, "Summer is fading, the leaves fall in ones and twos," the season being a metaphor for the endless cycle of life in which people are born, grow into adulthood, lose their innocence, and reproduce children to live the same kinds of lives that they did. In adulthood, Larkin points out that it is nothing short of bland and redundant in the lines, "Young mothers assemble at swing and sandpit, setting free their children." These lines suggest that it is not the first time these mothers have brought their children to the playground. It also relates children to adults, saying how childhood is a time of ignorance and leisure, while adulthood is one of surrendering and dissatisfaction. Women of this time period were commonly unemployed so that they could take care of the home while their husbands worked jobs such as carpentry and bricklaying, common after the war. Larkin sees this sort of life as being ruled by routine. Day-to-day activities that once held value are now meaningless. They are burdened with the responsibilities of everyday living and providing for their family. Larkin also says how relationships fade in the lines, "Our wedding," lying near the television. He explains how this routine renders marriages and relationships useless. Overall, this poem makes a very powerful statement about life in post-war Britain and how ordinary people's lives have become so dull.
This Be the Verse is a 12-line poem explaining the effect our parents have on us. Its strong and coarse language can be very captivating for some readers or can turn other readers away.
This be the verse. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself.
Its cynical tone has a deep and meaningful message about our lives. The opening stanza to this poem is actually rather straightforward and does not require much analysis. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They fill you with the faults they had, and add some extra just for you. It is evident here that Larkin is claiming that our parents, filled with pains and struggles, do their best to make sure that their children do not live the same painful life that they did. However, in doing this, they pass down their woes to their kids, burdening them even more than the parent was. In turn, their children grow up to become misery-stricken adults who pass the same thing down to their children, forever continuing this cycle of living. Larkin also provides a way in which we can avoid this cycle, saying, get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. He explains that the only way out is to get away from your parents, perhaps by means of leaving home or even leaving life. The other way is to not have kids of your own, which would be a sure way to break the pattern. This poem is clearly a generalization about life itself, how our internal struggles bleed into the lives of our offspring. In the line, man's hands on misery to man, these troubles are brought down generation by generation, off to an even worse degree, and no matter how we try, our parents will always have an impact on us and the way we develop in life. Larkin uses exact rhyme in this poem, with every other line rhyming perfectly. This assists the flow of the poem and is easy to transition from one line to the next without interruption. He also utilizes iambic pentameter, which greatly helps to convey the theme. The iambic pentameter puts emphasis on specific words such as mom and dad and you, so that the reader can focus on these parts of the poem and make the connection between parents and children easier and clearly. Overall, this poem, like many of Larkin's others, speaks for humankind and generalizes the point at which society sits. It is a very strong and deep poem, and certainly sums up Larkin's focus as a poet.